This past year, we have discovered that life often does not give us the best of our dreams, but it also brings to light our nightmares. We have discovered the hard way that the realities of the pandemic and natural disasters, as well as living in a society which has gone far beyond the Wild West of a bygone era. And all these can result in tragedy and even death. They can strike at any time, to anybody, anywhere. This has caused many to restrict their lives and place themselves in a self-imposed bubble out of fear. Life then becomes a vicious cycle, which is difficult to escape. In reality, to be caught up in this vicious cycle brings the death of the spirit, and in some instances, brings on death itself. That is why it is so important to always seek and find the positives in life while facing and living through times of pain and suffering, times of crisis, in order to bring hope. I have found throughout my life, and you have heard me say this many times, in every negative, there is a positive. One of these positives is always a faith, which leads us to know that God's presence in life is not to advance pain and suffering, but is there to provide healing, comfort, and hope. The writer of Lamentations illustrates this in our first lesson this morning. Although not included in our first reading this morning, the chapter begins with the lamenting of all the woes of personal and national suffering, which was going on in Jerusalem with the fall of Jerusalem to the Babylonians. It is reminiscent of the woes of Job. But unlike Job, the writer places the blame of the dismal situation they were experiencing on God. He writes, "I am one who has seen affliction under the rod of God's wrath. He has driven and brought me into darkness without any light. Against me alone he turns his hand, again and again all day long." It is so easy to blame all of our troubles on someone else, especially God, when the real truth is that our problems just may be of our own making, or the result of the natural order of life. Somehow, we think we are exempt from any problems happening to our lives. We are exempt from disease. We are exempt from addiction. We are exempt from the wear and tear of aging. We are exempt from our own mindless, self-destructing acts and decisions. When the inevitable happens, and those things occur as a result of human processes of life and are detrimental to us, then we sit back and we blame God. How often do we hear upon a tragedy? Why did God let this happen to me? How many times do a natural disaster such as a hurricane, flood, earthquake, or tornado, is God blamed? Why did God allow this to happen? It's like God had placed us in harm's way. But the fact is, we are the ones who choose to defy the natural order by living in Tornado Alley or in places which have reoccurring floods hurricanes and earthquakes, or we refuse to see the dangers involved in epidemic. We do this because we live under the delusion that it can not possibly happen to me. Then when we are struck by the fury of the inevitable, we say, why did God let this happen to me? That's like parking your car on the blind curve along Amtrak's main line and then wonder why it was demolished and blamed it on Amtrak, for it was the train's fault. The basic notion of mankind is to think we can do anything we wish without suffering any consequences. After all, it's me, and nothing can happen to me. Then when it happens, we are surprised and bewildered and ask, why me, God? Why me? Why did God let this happen to me? This basic notion only leads to a state of hopelessness. Since it is discovered that life is no longer a bowl of cherries, all for me, and just to please me. This unrealistic view of life brings forth woe is me syndrome and the hopelessness that leads to despair and even to I wish I was dead. I have had an occasion to talk with an elderly woman who is in her 90s and who exemplified this very thing. She refused to acknowledge the aging process. When I mentioned I was a minister, she then got on her high horse. Once believed in God, but now I can't. Well, I thought to myself, well, maybe the church had delusioned her. But that was not it. It seems as though she blamed her predicament of old age on God. Like he has anything to do with it, me getting older. It was as if she was old, that she now could not do and enjoy the same lifestyle as when she was young. Her life had been taken away from her. She must have thought that she could never get old. Not her. So she said that a loving God would never let this happen to me. So there is no God in my life. She thought that she should have been exempt from all the realities of human aging. No, not me. She denied the realities of life, viewed life as unfair to her. Even in her 90s, she had good health. But her attitude made her a miserable person. She was left blind to any joy in life, leaving her hopeless and embittered. The merry-go-round of life had ended because she had denied the realities of life. Now, even though the Hebrews attributed many of the acts of human tragedy to be the result of the hand of God's wrath, they also saw God as a God of hope and mercy. After the woe is me outpouring of the writer of Lamentations, he wrote in our lesson today, the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the souls that seek him. These words are so true. And that even though through our most trying times, even through illness and pain and suffering, even going through the woes of this past year, God's steadfast love never ceases. It is still there. This comes through an undying faith in knowing that his mercies never cease. They never come to an end. These words were alive within the woman who had suffered the humiliation and pain of hemorrhages for 12 years. For 12 years, she had gone to physicians with the hope of being cured, but each time she suffered the disappointment of not being cured. She could have given up. She could have wished she were dead. She could have blamed it all on God. Not this woman. She never gave up, never lost hope. She clung to her faith that God had not abandoned her. And this gave her the hope and the spirit to see each day as the day in which she would find healing. For it was a day that the Lord had made for her. This hope, this faith, was to be realized when she saw Jesus surrounded by a crowd. She had heard that this Jesus of Nazareth had performed many acts of healing. And now this was her chance. Her faith was so strong that she said to herself, if I but touch his clothes, I will be made well. And she made her way through the crowd, pushing and shoving aside, touching his cloak. And immediately she was made well. And when Jesus discovered her and what had happened, he said, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease. What faith, what hope, what a positive spirit is seen within this suffering woman. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. Jesus then went on to the house of a synagogue leader whose daughter had just died. The family and friends had their hope dashed for any recovery and were in mourning. But even when all hope seemed to be lost, Jesus raised the girl to life to the amazement of everybody. Again in Lamentations, for the Lord will not reject forever. Although he causes grief, he will have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love, for he does not willingly afflict or grieve anyone. The good news. The good news is that God does not abandon us. When we experience the crisis of life, no matter how they may have come to be, he is always there, giving hope, giving life. We see this in Jesus, for he never left the person suffering and in crisis. He never left them alone. He healed them. He fulfilled their hope by lifting them out of their human crisis and made their lives whole again. You know, the ministry of the church is to follow in Jesus' footsteps. It is not to be silent or absent when suffering brings a person to the feeling of hopelessness. It must never give an end to the hopelessness, for we have a message of hope, and this message brings healing. We have a message which does not play the blame game, for God's love is beyond all of that. We have a message which never gives up on life, for that life is a gift from God. We never give up, even in the realities and knowing these realities of life. Whether we seek the fullness of life now and throughout eternity. In light of this, we have the power of healing, for we have God's message of hope. This hope brings healing. We only need the faith to be God's messenger of this good news of hope and healing. Through faith, you and I can and will make a difference. Amen.